Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Connected Ministry series, where we connect you to ministry thought leaders that help you overcome disconnection and build a more connected ministry. This series is brought to you by Gloo, the tech platform that connects ministry leaders like you to resources, people, insights, and funding so your people can flourish and your organization can thrive. So if you are asking for ways to think about engagement, how do I deepen engagement? Well, Gloo is here to help with that. The Gloo platform offers free texting called Gloo messaging that helps you engage your community with regular communication and opportunities that keep your people engaged. I mean, not only does it keep them engaged, it actually starts the engagement, because texting is known to have much higher open rates and engagement rates than just simple email. So the texting tools that Gloo offers gives you things like digital prayer prompts and ways for people to submit their prayer and ask for prayer, as well as things like surveys that help you ask your people how they're doing so that you can serve them in more relevant ways. If you want to explore the ways that Gloo messaging can help you, go to gloo.us. That's gloo.us. All right, guys, so recently I had a chance to sit down with my good friends, Grant and Cheyanne Skeldon, and they are just the real deal in thinking about the next generation of leaders, and especially what does it mean to build bridges and be intentional about building bridges across generations. If you don't know about Grant, let me tell you, he is the Next Gen Director at Think Media, and he's done a lot of work with Gloo. You can learn more about some of that work right here on this channel, and I would encourage you to check it out. His wife, Cheyanne, is a certified Patterson Life Plan Guide. She's also the Director of Culture at Way Church, and she is just so insightful, so intuitive, so intelligent. Together, Grant and Cheyanne live, serve, and minister in Nashville, Tennessee. And so in this episode, we had a chance to chat, and they shared their personal stories of leadership development and how there were key leaders in their journey, very early on in their journey, who made a really big difference in terms of where they are today. So whether you're an older or a younger listener, there are all kinds of relevant nuggets in this conversation that are here for you, including what it means for newly developing leaders to lead up. And what does it mean for more seasoned leaders to really empower and build next-gen cultures in their churches and organizations? All of that is covered here in this conversation and more. So let's dive in.
I often get asked about how did you end up trying to convene or accelerate young leaders and even find such unique Christians, because I do have a heart to help Christians in culture. I think it's really important because when I spent some time in seminary, I learned so much, but the one thing I did notice is I was like, man, I feel like this is designed to train pastors for the church, and I don't feel like still that there's too many places that train Christian leaders for the culture, because in the majority of Christians won't end up being pastors. We got to learn how to build up the body, and equip the saints, to do the work of the ministry. And if we don't, then often what happens, and is happening, I think, is then the body comes to the church as like, hey, we should do this. And they really mean you should do this, or we should do this, you should do this. And it ends up where the church is doing all the work and the ministry, because we're not, don't have those systems in place to equip them. And when I look at the next generation, I'm like, two reasons why that's important is, one, they don't want, everyone's asking, how do we reach the next generation? I think they want to be leveraged, not reached. It's like, help me reach my own generation. They're so burdened. And I think being refined to go and reach their own generation. It's their friends, it's their family, it's kids that they grew up with and care about a lot. And so I think there's a big difference of how to do ministry to the next generation, or the better thing would be to do ministry through the next generation and empower them. And not hey, it's their time, pass the baton. It's we're working together, we're walking together. I'm supporting you. We have the wisdom, sometimes the resources, and you have time, you have passion, you have a new perspective and a new generation. So that's one, is they want to be empowered. So they want to be equipped. And this is what we're already supposed to do. And then two, this is huge to me, is most young people don't go to church. And so if we only train pastors and equip pastors to lead churches and communicate at churches, it'll be great. It's just the most of the next generation's never going to hear those sermons and never going to meet those people. And so it's not either or. It's not swing the pendulum like, hey, forget training pastors and start training Christians for culture. It's just both. We, I believe, have been fighting with one hand behind our back when we just train one party and not train the larger party, when the next generation may not go to church, but they do watch TV. They do, or really they don't even do that as much as they subscribe to shows. So they watch actors. They are influenced. Like, you got to think, if you're a Gen Z, you are not anchored in God's word. You don't really have any experience too much with the Bible. Your parents aren't even maybe Christians. You don't go to church. What's anchoring and telling you who you are, what relationships are supposed to look like, what friendship is supposed to look like, what manhood or womanhood or success looks like? And I believe it's without scripture, without church, without that community, it is music. I mean, lyrics are forming what they believe love is and what success looks like. And movies are showing role models of what that looks like. And so YouTube, I mean, kids, I'm getting older now and I don't even know what channel what is anymore, but I do subscribe to channels on YouTube, and these kids, children, have their favorite YouTubers out there. And so I want to be very intentional to, with us, I think, like, how can we train up high capacity young Christians who are actors or are athletes or are in fashion and are in these places that are still influencing the next generation, and especially those outside of the church. And so when I got into it, I was really young and I got challenged to reach my generation. And then I think I quickly realized, man, I think I'm gonna have to do that in a different way than we have in the past, because the next generation isn't going to church, but they are being influenced by culture. And luckily, God has a lot of Christians in culture right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been interesting too, seeing kind of each of our journeys go parallel to one another. Because Grant's been you led your own ministry in Dallas for 7 years. And then when he merged with the Think Team, we've been with them for 3 years. But I've never been in full-time vocational ministry. I grew up in a Christian home, so have had the honor of loving Jesus for most of my life. But I have always worked in the business space. So I've done major gift fundraising for a university. I've done business development for a construction company. I've worked at a tech company. I've worked here at Gloo for a long time and been given so many amazing opportunities in the tech space. I'm transitioning into being a life plan guide and helping people understand what their unique calling and purpose is in life. But it's always been very informed by my faith. It's never been, I need to have a conversation directly about God for God to be in the conversation, for God to be in the strategy, for God to be in the heart. And I think that's where a lot of the opportunity lies with the next generation. So many of them feel called to culture. And I think it's strategic on God's part. I really think it's his way of saying, I'm going to place specific people with specific callings in specific places to reach people for my kingdom, that they would come to know me and be able to live life to the fullest. And so God has put us at this point in time. And so I think we're just constantly asking, like, how can we go where God's already moving? That's a common phrase in our house. How do we just partner with him? And what we just kind of see ebbs and flows and patterns of the Lord's hand in culture and where he's placing Christians in arts and entertainment and some of the other spheres that Grant was mentioning. So as someone who's very close to someone who's in full-time vocational ministry, but not being there myself, it's this really beautiful both and. I don't even think it's so much of a tension. I really do think it's a both and in our relationship, and then in the way that it kind of bleeds out and spills out into the different rooms we get to be in, the different friendships and relationships that we get to have. I feel like it's made us better, having that both and.
Yeah. And I would say that my vision and definitely my heart has, I don't want to say changed, but I would say has become more robust since doing this work, because originally it was for mission. It was, these are the lost. Yeah. They're not going to church. They are being influenced by culture. God always has Christians in culture. So much of the Old Testament
Yeah.
they're not pastors. They're like they're assistants to the king. They're prophets. They're marketplace leaders. They're a lot of them are in government actually. Like
Carpenters.
yeah. And
We know
so
carpenters.
God used a lot of non vocational ministry leaders in the Old Testament and even in the New. I mean, most of the disciples. And so it's not a new plan. Just kind of getting back to a lot of what we have seen in the past, but it was for missional purposes. Now, though, I've started to meet these young leaders, and whether they're like, hey, amazing in American Idol, or the So You Think You Can Dance winner, and or several Olympic athletes. There's a lot of actors in Hollywood right now that are Christians, or on Broadway in New York. We are always looking for God. Who are you using? Like He told us in Luke 10 to pray for more laborers, and I believe it can be. I know myself to know that there's no prayer I've prayed more. Outside of for my family and for the salvation of people I really care about, than for God to raise up more laborers. And I think this season of my life is seeing the fulfillment of meeting those laborers, that work is plentiful, and we need more laborers to be there. And as I've met those laborers, though, that are in culture, where I say it's kind of changed or gotten more robust is I used to like, guys, we need you to be missionaries, but also I've realized they also need to be healthy, and they need to finish well, and they need to be equipped and anchored in God's word with their theology and how their worldview. And especially, I don't want to, in light of how many leaders we've seen fall, I don't want to see them be one more leader to do that. And they have, I would say, even more likelihood to, because a lot of these high capacity young leaders, because there's very few of them, they don't have as much accountability or authority over them, and trying to encourage them to get in more community. But they are navigating in places, whether it is Hollywood or it is in the music industry, or they're always on tour, or they're always traveling because they're like a pro athlete. They're in places that pastors, we can't even like really fathom, when maybe people are throwing themselves at them, or would be willing to buy whatever for them, or they're in such transactional relationships, like, hey, they want something from me for partnerships or deals or brands, that it can be a very lonely place, and no one else values often the same values they have. In fact, they're encouraging you to compromise those values. And so for them to have friends that also get it, like, hey, I'm also on the road all the time, or I also am leading at a very young age, or I'm building this thing and this brand or this business, and I'm whatever it is, like I'm navigating these kind of unique things at a young age in a sector that maybe isn't the most faith-based, but I want to represent love. I want to represent Christ. I want to be intentional. I even want to be bold, where I can be bold in these spaces. But I want them to finish well. I mean, I often say, if evangelism is helping people get closer to God, then I think a lot of what we're seeing is de-evangelism whenever a leader falls, because there's this trust that's then built with this influence in their life, especially spiritually. And then when they fall, it really is pushing a generation to deconstruct more, or into more church hurt, where they, if again, evangelism is closer to God, now they're farther from God, and especially farther from God's people in the church. Because I'm like, they've lost trust. And so the more we see these leaders fall, there is an impact, clearly and negatively, that it makes. And I want to make sure we start making sure they're healthy at a young age, so that who knows where they're going to be, and the beauty of what they're going to be able to do 10 years from now if they're already emerging. But also I want them to be careful that the impact and the negative impact they could have if they don't put in the right things now, and the right priorities, the right motives, and just walking with Christ. It's like, you are enough. You do not have to be this thing or do this thing for God to love you. It is an overflow and something He's given you so that you can now serve Him. But you could never do another thing or lift another finger. He'd be so pleased with you. That a lot of them do need to know that. So then they're living from approval instead of for it.
I love that. So inherent in what you're saying, I was going to ask you a question about how would you speak to older people about how they might pour into younger people in really practical ways. It sounds like some of what you're saying is authenticity, some of it is validation and encouragement in being versus doing. Like, give a little bit, it's really a two-part question. So I want to ask the same question to any young person who's listening. What would they do? But let's start with, from older people to younger people. Where would older people start?
if I was talking to someone older who's like, hey, how do I pour into a young person? What should I focus on? There's so many angles you could go at it. It's really, one is I found the factors that impact young people make them not just like a young Christian that loves God, but a young Christian who loves God, and their love for Him then overflows into like they're almost like an impactful leader, and whatever it means their family or whether it means their city or their job, like they change environments that they're in. In Acts, like actually the Pharisees say of the disciples that these disciples, or they say these men who have turned this city upside down, and they had only been there for a day. I kind of like that, as I want young Christians that, and you influence the space you're in, that you, it's different because of your presence. I know that's the case with Jesus. Like he doesn't, we don't really have a lot of stories of like he was there and then nothing happened. It's usually like everybody there is in awe, and there's impact, there's tears, there's whatever it is. And so what I've found, what makes those people different, where they are like that, to where they just, instead of just staying in church, they're like leading on behalf of it, is one, I've seen that they will speak life into their gifting or their character. There's something very powerful about seeing something in a young person and voicing that, not just even in saying it. It's two, then I would say moving towards discipling them, empowering them to like come into your world and like see into it. They say discipleship is caught more than it's taught. And so there's something powerful about not just sitting and listening to a message, but walking with the one who's giving the message, or walking with someone who's doing where you want to one day be. Three is a big one that I think it's challenging, but empowering a young person to do something actually they don't deserve to do, and they're maybe not even technically ready. Like I think there's a chance he could or she could do it, but I've just found there's a common denominator among high capacity young leaders where if you look back on their story and trace it, there were earlier moments in their teenage years or early 20s where they got empowered to maybe even challenged to like, hey, you're going to be in charge of this. And that person was like, wow, are you sure? Like, I'm not equipped to do this. I've never done it before. And they were like, yeah, you got it. Just figure it out. And that was like this milestone moment where they figured it out. I think it humbles them. It makes them ask questions. It makes them seek wisdom. It makes them rely on the Lord. And the more moments they have like that, where they're like almost put into the deep end with supervision and like, I got your back. If anything falls, like, don't worry, but it's okay. Like, even if you fail a little bit, like there's a lot of those moments. It's a common denominator. And then lastly, a huge one is being a door opener. The older generation has access to great relationships and networks because they've been around, they've moved to different cities, they've gone to different maybe colleges, they're just more connected, different jobs. Like younger people, you tend to just know those who grew up in your city and town if you lived in one city, maybe your high school, maybe your college. So you're just starting to build a network. So when you're looking for a job, you're around everyone else that's looking for a job, but you start hanging out with people that have been around 20 years, several different cities, and you're like, do you know anyone in this sector? They're bound to probably know more, definitely more than the young person will. And so being a door opener, like, let me connect you to who you should know based on where you want to go. And also, let me not only connect you, I'm going to put my neck on the line. I'm going to say, you got to meet with this person, or you got to even help this person, or I'm going to recommend that you force something that's bigger than you probably are ready for right now. But doing that, like being someone who sees something in someone, being someone who disciples, being someone who will like empower, and then being someone who open doors for someone. I mean, it's a sure shot for, show me someone who's young, who's killing it in their 20s, that's like on a national level, whatever, whether it's a business or a nonprofit or some type of organization. I promise you they had several of those elements happen several times in their story.
That's awesome. I love that. It's like the secret sauce that you've distilled down into those three pieces. What would you add to that?
I think the phrase we've heard a lot is teaching someone how to fish versus just handing them the fish. And as common as that is, I would share that same sentiment. I think Grant shared a lot of specifics and ways that you could do that. But it's this idea of coming alongside somebody and saying, let me teach you. Let me actually take some of my experience, some of my wisdom, some of my practice, and let you into that. Whether it's, this is how I lead meetings, or this is how I, document things in order to share it up and manage up in our organization, in order to help cast the vision in a way that makes sense. Here's how you navigate really hard conversations around conflict within your team. Here's how you can think about and understand team dynamics. Like those really specific things that we all kind of learn over time as we gain more experience. The younger generation doesn't have that experience yet. And so while it's easy as we're progressing in our careers and in our workspaces to be growing in our own ways and not even realizing that it's happening, that is of immense value to early professionals, early actors, actresses. I feel like it really does speak across industries. It's like, what are the things that you've gained and learned over the years that you can look back and say, hey, this is something I realized I didn't know when I was 25, 26. This would have been really helpful. And a lot of that comes out in relationship. So as you're just having conversations, you're realizing like, hey, what's on the front of your heart right now? Like, what's the big thing that you're bumping up against? And then just listening. Let them share. Listen for the things of like, okay, Lord, is there something that you have in me that you want to impart to them through my experience, through the things that you have walked with me through, so that I can, make things better for them than they maybe were for me. Like this would have saved me a lot of heartache. This would have saved me a lot of headache. This would have saved me a lot of time and energy and resource if I had learned this lesson, or if I had done it this particular way. And I want you to succeed. And I think that's really the heart behind it. It's like, how do we partner together and dismiss any spirit of just competing with one another versus collaborating with one another. Even if we're not finding ourselves in the exact same space, like we're always going to find something in common. How are we continuing to champion one another in our unique spheres and our unique callings and our unique walks, and just looking for those opportunities? So I think just teaching us how to fish, I know in my own life has been immensely valuable, has taken me way further, way faster, and not because it had anything to do with me. It was the generosity and the wisdom of people who looked back and they saw me and they said, I care about you. I want you to succeed. Let's lock arms. What do you need? How can I help? What are the questions you're asking? I may or may not have the answer, but I'm happy to talk with you about it. That, as simple as it sounds, absolute game changer.
I love it. Okay, talk to me about the other side of that. So you've got older church leaders, Christians listening to this and going, okay, I'm taking note. Now you've got younger Christians and church leaders listening to them. What would you speak to them in terms of how to create, again, that reach out?
There's a very popular marriage book called Love and Respect, based on, I think it's Ephesians, where it talks about husbands, love your wife, and wives, respect your husbands. And it's kind of like, it's not the only thing, but it seems like a core desire from one spouse to the other. And I've kind of thought through, is there something similar to that maybe between generations of what the older generation generally desires from the younger generation and what the younger generation generally desires from the older generation? And if I took a stab at it, and what I've kind of found to really, just connect and resonate with like, man, we're yearning for this from the older generation. And I've seen like, man, thank you for doing this towards us from the older generation is, instead of love and respect, I would say be honor and belief. That the older generation desires to be honored and should and needs to be honored by the younger generation. And when we get that wrong, and it's not like, hey, your turn's over, or you messed this up and now we got to fix it, or hey, we're doing all this and it's really cool, what you're doing is old. Man, that really breaks between multi-generational health. And then when the older generation doesn't believe, and they're doubting, they're worried, they're stressed, or worse, they're just even critiquing all the time. Like, this is what, back in my day, this is what we did. And it kind of says, okay, well, I guess I'm always going to get it wrong. We're just going to do it our own way. And that is what I would say is like, young people, I think they definitely desire to be believed in. I mean, any young person, man, it's something of maybe to a fatherhood, parental level where you like just to have older people who believe in you, like almost believe in you more than you believe in yourself. Who doesn't want that at any age? But especially when you're young and you're passionate, you're just getting started and finding your footing. And then when you're older, to be like recognized and acknowledged, hey, you're standing on the foundation that we've kind of built. And so I always want to be thankful that I could not do what we do if it weren't for the generations that built what they did, and through blood, sweat, and tears. And so that's I think the healthy church is one that honors the older generation and believes that that's set the foundation for the next generation to do what Jesus said, even greater things.
What would you add to
That was really great. I would say 3 things came to mind: honor, humility, and willingness to go first. I think there's the verse that just simply says, honor everyone. Honor everyone. And so as next generation leaders, as next generation Christians who are still in process as we all are, how can you intentionally look for ways to honor those who've gone ahead of you? How can you honor your pastor? How can you honor those who are, your elders in your church? How can you honor the older parents who are now empty nesters? Like, what is it in their stories that you can identify and say, wow, I really respect this about you, and just carry this posture of honor, I think bleeds into, ironically, humility. It reminds us that we don't all have it figured out, and we are still all growing and learning. And so how can we do that together? And so what that can look like is going first and asking questions. Like, what could it look like for young Christians who are looking to be discipled, mentored, who are looking to grow and be poured into? Would you be willing to go first? Would you be willing to, during the church service, when it's that awkward moment that we're all kind of like, okay, yeah, I'll turn and shake the hand of my neighbor and say hello. Like, what could it look like for you to be intentional with finding someone who's a few steps ahead of you in life stage or in spiritual growth and maturity, and say like, hey, I wanted to introduce myself. I've not seen you before, but I just really wanted to say hi. I'm trying to be intentional with inviting people who are a few steps ahead of me into my life. If you don't mind, can I just ask you a few questions real quick? What's one thing you wish you could tell your 25-year-old self? It's like you can go over that in 3 minutes. If it goes further, it's like, can I buy you a coffee and just pick your brain on, I'm dating right now and trying to figure out relationship stuff, and you've been married 10, 20 years. Like, can I just pick your brain? I would love to just buy you a coffee and pick your brain. What could it look like as young Christians to honor, to be willing to go first, to sit in a posture of humility, to ask thoughtful questions, and then be willing to listen, take notes, like bring a notebook and a pen, or pull up the notes app on your phone and take notes. Let them know, like, hey, I really respect your time and energy, the things that you're sharing. Maybe not all of it fits, but just the fact that someone would be willing to share that with me. How can I show respect in that, and be really intentional, being willing to be the first one to initiate relationship and contact? Because what I've actually learned in our experience with mentors and people who are a few steps ahead of us is they're just as nervous as we are to take the first step. They're just as nervous as we are to initiate the conversation. So you know what? Like, just be willing to go first. There's no telling what could come out of it. The worst thing that's going to happen is you don't quite connect, and okay, great. 10 fingers and 10 toes. Like, everybody walks away with this. Like, nobody's hurt. So that would be my encouragement to young Christians as they're trying to figure out, how do I grow and mature, become more like Christ, and move forward in life.
So, connected ministry, it's this idea that we're seeing emerge at Gloo, because we're seeing lots of ministries, we're seeing lots of disconnection and ultra connection. There's no definition for connected ministry. So if you had to think about Christians, ministry leaders, and you were giving a definition for what connected ministry is and what it looks like, how would you define it?
When we think about connected ministries, or just even the word unity, it has been a conversation, thankfully, for the last almost decade. Though it's so interesting is how much the world has become more and more divided. It has pushed the church towards so much prioritizing towards, hey, how do we be a anchoring, uniting force in the midst of this? And so it's the beautiful thing that God does do is he never wastes a good crisis to bring his people together. And I'm thankful that I'm seeing churches, denominations, ethnicities, believers from all these different industries and places, and parts of the nation starts coming together more than I ever saw in the earlier parts of my faith. But then it comes to the question, what does connected ministry, or really at the core of that, in my opinion, is unity. What does unity really look like? And there's a lot of opinions on it. I do have one. I do think I'm going to quote the best opinion on it, Jesus. And it's a high bar, because some people might say, oh, is it we used to be divided? And then I think the next level might be now we're maybe familiar with each other. So like, oh yeah, I know of that pastor down the street, or that church, or I know of that ministry. Like, because sometimes we're not even divided. We're just like, I don't even know about my neighbors that are my teammates, that are my, I would say, family. Like, we'll spend thousands of years, eternity together in heaven. So it's one, knowing who is your family here, and they're on the same mission. Especially if they're in the same neighborhood, they're in the same, maybe if you're an organization, the same lane, they care about the same thing. We gotta be familiar with who it is. Then there's, do you actually know them? Like, or have you made an act to go and get to know them? That would be, I think, the next level. Then it's like, do you like them? Because sometimes it's interesting with unity is we all for unity. Like, I'm in the next gen space. So if I meet someone who's digging wells in Africa and they're doing that, amazing. I love it. If I meet someone who's doing a church plant in New York, absolutely, it's so cool. I'm so thankful they're in a space like New York, or an actor who's a Christian who's trying to navigate that and use their faith. Amazing. But I meet someone else who's also doing next gen ministry, almost just like I'm doing. I'm like, are they doing it better than me? Or why are they? It's once it starts being some overlap of like, oh yeah, even sometimes it's like, people will say, oh, you're kind of like this person. I'm like, no, that person kind of like me. Or start thinking of like, I don't know if I've been in a situation, you start thinking like, no, well, yeah, what's different is they always focus on this and I do this. Instead of like, absolutely, we get to meet all these different areas. So it's moving from like, I'm familiar, I know them, to like, yeah, I like that person a lot. I respect that person. It's this like and respect. I enjoy them. But if we go and quote the main source, I mean, it's Jesus. It's a high bar, because a lot of people would be okay with just, hey, now we know each other more and we hang out more. And I think the biggest sign is, do we love each other? Is what just, of course, Jesus always calls us to one of the hardest and highest things, is that they will know you are my disciples if you love one another. And takes a lot of time to love someone. Or at least it takes a lot of time to prove that there truly is love there. At least can't be in one interaction. It's a commitment. It's true love, especially relational. It's for life, and I think it's acknowledging we are doing life together. We are family. Of course, I love you. I want you to succeed. True love is not competitive. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't try to compete with each other. And so that's where I want to get. Especially, I can't change the whole world, but I always think I can change and help influence the next generation and how they love each other. And one day they will be the older generation and they'll have the seats of power even more. And I want them to have such a love for each other that the world's surprised, like, how do you guys from different denominations or different industries or different ethnicities, you guys just are different. Like, you definitely don't believe the same things perfectly. And they'll be like, how do y'all know each other like this? Because it's clear y'all like are close. And they could say, well, back in my early 20s, I started getting a part of this group, and we started doing intentional life together, supporting each other, celebrating what God was doing, even helping each other. And lastly, I'd say that's the biggest sign of true unity, is collaboration, partnership. You actually create something together. And because I think the best form of unity is not just, oh, the church is encouraged, it's the world is impacted. Like, the world should feel unity. And if they don't, it's really, we're just getting to level one, in my opinion, of we always should have been unified. Like, if we get to a place where we love each other, I think like, if you really think about it, why would we not love each other if we're going to spend eternity together? If we are literally a family, like if Jesus is the common denominator that saved us, that drew him to himself, we all have like the closest, most trusted person in our story is all the same person. And if you've ever met someone, especially a stranger who lives in a city, and you've ever like said, hey, oh, you went to that college? I knew someone at that college. We do this all the time with people we meet or a stranger. Like, do you know this person or this person? Of all the things we can say, we don't ask questions more about them. We ask if they know someone. Mm-hmm. Do you know this person that also is in your city or job or place? We do that as like a human nature. And when it comes to us, we're meeting people. And you notice the more likable that person is, the more you're like, yo, that person, like they're amazing. Oh my God. And you have an interaction by the greatness of a person in the between you guys. And so for me, I'm like, Jesus is that person, like the person who's impacted you the most, you love the most, that has been so patient with you the most, has served you and pursued you. They were faithful when you were faithless. Like the most meaningful, tender moments you've ever had was with that person. And so has that person over there. How would we then not be? Of course we love each other. Now let's start doing stuff that impacts the rest of the world, because the world will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. It's an evangelistic opportunity is what unity truly is, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, when I think about connected ministry in the church and ministry spaces, we often talk about the silos. Talk about how you can be doing something and be so honed in, so focused on the specific thing God's given you to do, and that's needed. But what if instead of silos, we thought about ourselves as body parts? As the Bible, kind of even gives us that analogy to work off of. It's like, yes, my thumb has a very specific job to do. I'm very grateful for my thumb. It needs to do the exact things that God designed it to do, and it needs to do those things well in order for the rest of the body to be able to do what it was designed to do as a collective. And so I think it's this both and of, okay, what is the unique thing that God's put on my individual heart, on my family's heart? What's my church's heart, my ministry's heart? Like, what is that unique thing? How do I do that well? But how do I do that well in a way that is healthy for my part of the body, but it's also healthy for the body in general? Because the job of my kidney is very different than the job of my thumb. So, but if the thumb's constantly looking at the kidney and saying, why aren't you being like me? Or like, I don't agree with the way that you filter things out, or I don't agree with this, that, or the other. That's not going to be very helpful. Not that there can't be feedback amongst the body. I know that analogy breaks down, but it's this idea of how do we think about ourselves not only as this kind of individual piece of the body that is very important and very needed, but it's also there as a part of this bigger thing, this bigger initiative. I think it's really easy to lose sight of that, and not because any of us want to, but because we feel very called and drawn to the thing that God's put in our heart and in our path. But how do we do that while keeping the rest of the body in mind? As a matter of fact, the thing I love about Gloo is I liken Gloo to the arteries in our body. It's the vessel through which nutrients and resources can flow and help connect some of that. None of the nutrients come from the artery itself, but it's this thing that's helping the system stay healthy. And so it's like, what is that unique part of the body that God has asked you, your organization, your church, your ministry? What's that role? And then how do you do it in a way that, to the best of your ability and by the power and the help of the Holy Spirit, leads to life, leads to health, leads to flourishing, leads to every part of the body taking care of one another. When one part's hurt, like, how can we compensate? How can we come and bring support and aid? When one part's flourishing, how do we cheerlead that? How do we champion that and celebrate it with one another? It's dismissing this idea of competition, because if we're one body, for one part to be doing well, is the whole body doing well? It's that whole person, it's that whole being. How can we maybe reframe some of the ways that we think about the ways that we're operating the world, or different giftings or different callings or different kind of places and spaces we find ourselves in, and think about, okay, I may be very different. I may even be very far, like my toe is very far from my eyeball. They're not connected, the two of them, but it's because of everything else in the body that they're able to still remain as one. In fact, that was Jesus' greatest prayer for them. Lord, make them one as we are one. So how can we live into that? How do we pray into that? How do we think about our ministry at a very practical level? Not just this abstract, wow, that sounds great, kind of high in the sky idea, but what does that look like for you to be intentionally looking around and saying, Lord, what are the different parts of the body that you've naturally already connected me to? And then who are they connected to? And how are they connected there? And how are they connected there? Because you begin to paint this picture of what I think God intended for his body, the church, the Big C church, to look like. Because the mission is too great. The cost is too high for us to be to be filtering our decisions, to be thinking about it, I think, any other way.
We can all embrace a spirit of unity, just like the vision that's laid out in Ephesians 4:16, referring to the church as a body, joined together for the building up of itself in love. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. I know I did. I'm so grateful to Grant and Cheyanne for sharing their insights and their ideas with us. And if you'd like to keep exploring this very important topic of next generation and leadership, we've partnered with Grant on a 6-session course entitled The Next Gen Moment. You can access that for free at gloo.us/Grant Skeldon. And if you're looking to hear more bite-sized perspectives from ministry leaders on topics like how to become a data-informed leader, what makes a connected ministry, and how can leaders be more emotionally healthy, well, be sure to check out the Perspective series right here on our channel. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.